Greetings, aspirants. Today, let's look at another concept from the subject Environment and Ecology, that is coral bleaching. So, what is coral bleaching? To understand what is coral bleaching, first let us understand what are corals. So, what are corals? Corals are invertebrate aquatic animals that are free swimming and they attach to surfaces like submerged rocks or other hard surfaces to live. So these corals are of two types, hard corals and soft corals. Now these corals are jelly-like organisms that are found in the aquatic ecosystem. And these hard corals have exoskeletons, that is, the skeleton is formed outside their bodies. And for the skeleton to be formed outside, they need calcium carbonate. And this calcium is drawn from the saline water of the marine ecosystem. And hence, they live in oceanic or they are found in oceanic ecosystems. Now, these corals live in symbiotic relationship with algae, which is called as zooxanthellae. So these algae are the food producing organisms. So as we see, even in terrestrial ecosystem, we know that wherever there are primary food producers, there you find major biodiversity. So these food producing organisms are the algae or the zooxanthellae, which becomes the ecosystem for various other species that feed on them. And hence, these are called as tropical rainforest of oceans. Now, the corals also build coral reefs. We have already seen they have exoskeletons. So these corals live in colonies. So they live together. And when they die, the exoskeletons seem to form a hard surface in which other corals come and live. The other larvae of the other coral organisms come and attach to these hard surfaces and start to live in the colonies of the coral exoskeletons. And hence, an ecosystem is formed, and these complete structure is called as a reef. So coral reefs are those hard surfaces from the previous generation corals, wherein the new generation corals are also thriving. Now, soft corals do not produce any reefs, and most of the reef building corals depend on zooxanthellae for their food. We have already seen zooxanthellae is the algae that is present in the tissues of the corals and which has a symbiotic relationship with the corals. Now, we need to understand that for these corals to thrive in an ecosystem, they have certain criteria. That is, they are mostly abundant in the tropical waters, where the temperature of the water is 23 to 29 degrees Celsius. And they need clean water, because we are seeing that the algae in the corals are food producing organisms. So to produce food, the availability of sunlight is very important. So for the availability of sunlight, for the sunlight to reach the corals, the water needs to be very clean. So keeping these requirements in our mind, let's move on and see what is coral bleaching. So coral bleaching happens when the atmosphere, the environment of the coral is very much stressed, and the temperature or the light and the nutrients they expel the symbiotic algae living in these tissues, causing them to turn completely white. So what happens? We need to understand that the color of the corals is due to the algae that is present in them. Otherwise, which they are white in color. Because of the calcium carbonate structures, they appear to be white. Now, we need to understand when these coral ecosystems are stressed due to the changes in temperature or light or the sunlight or the nutrients, they tend to, the algae in the corals tend to die. And hence, the corals appears white. And if the same situation continues, they eventually, the coral system, the corals also eventually die. So bleach the corals does not mean dead corals. But eventually, if there are no measures taken to prevent the bleaching, coral bleaching, then eventually the coral ecosystem die, which creates a major imbalance in the ocean, aquatic or marine ecosystems. So let's see what are the causes of coral bleaching. First one, as we have seen, increased ocean temperature. The major cause is the climate change, the global warming, and or when there is a runoff or pollution from generated precipitation dilutes the ocean water. That is when there is pollution, water pollution due to the runoff from the industrial waste or something like that. What happens? The water becomes diluted, and hence their availability of nutrients becomes less, which might kill the algae and hence the corals. Now, extreme low tides and exposure to the air during the low tides also can cause bleaching in the shallow corals. We need to understand here that why are we discussing about coral bleaching? Humans always tend to think about economy. So, these corals has a great economy by the way of tourism. And if the corals are bleached, then the tourism economy is affected. And if the marine ecosystem is disturbed, what happens? The fish availability reduces. So what happens? The stress comes again on the terrestrial food systems. That means we need to produce more and more food on the terrestrial ecosystems for the increasing population, which becomes a problem for us. So keeping these factors in mind, it is very important for us to conserve the corals. So today we have understood the concept of coral bleaching. Thank you.